The instructor called me weak before I even set foot on the training floor. I heard him say it through the open door, his voice carrying the kind of confident laziness that belongs to someone who has never been proven wrong. He was speaking to his assistant, a thin greenish creature with 4 arms and nervous eyes that kept blinking in an irregular pattern. The instructor said the human cadet would not last 2 weeks. He said my file was a curiosity at best and a mistake at worst. He said Earth was a primitive rock, and its people were soft, over-emotional, and completely unsuited for the demands of the Interstellar Academy. He said it pleasantly, the way you state a fact about the weather. I walked through that door anyway. My name is Claire Hadley, 19 years old, from a small town in northern England where the hills roll down into each other like sleeping animals, and the wind comes off the high ground loaded with rain and cold, and something that feels very much like a personal challenge. I had passed every entrance test the Academy sent to Earth, every single one. I had done it alone, in a converted barn my grandfather had used for equipment storage, with a second-hand training kit held together by 2 replacement bolts and a cable tie, and a video feed that cut out twice during the final physical trials. I had still finished with the 3rd highest score in my testing group. None of that, apparently, was in the version of my file that Instructor Velthara had been reading. The training room smelled like something between metal and wet stone. It was large, with a ceiling high enough that the blue light strips along the walls did not reach the top of it, and the floor was a pale, slightly textured surface that absorbed sound in a way that made every footstep feel private. There were 42 cadets already seated on low benches, arranged in a half-circle facing the instructor's position. I counted them as I came through the door, not because I needed the number but because I always count. My mother used to say I cataloged the world before I walked into it. She meant it as a gentle tease. I took it as a compliment. 42 aliens, not a single human face, not even a species that looked close. I sat down at the end of a bench. The cadet beside me had 3 eyes set wide in a flat, circular head, silver-gray skin, and a quiet, measured quality that I had already decided meant she was paying close attention to everything. She shifted away from me by about 6 centimeters when I sat. I noticed. I did not react. I put my bag between my feet, squared my shoulders, and looked at the front of the room. Velthara stood at the center. He was large in the way that some things are large and you feel it before you fully process it, a pressure in the air around him like the moment before a thunderstorm. Quarathi, according to the species briefing I had memorized on the transport ship. Roughly 2.5 meters tall, 8 limbs in total, the lower 4 functioning as legs set wide and low, the upper 4 as arms, each ending in fingers that moved constantly and independently, like they were each holding a private conversation. His skin shifted color in slow, rolling waves, blue-green when he was still, darker blue in motion. I would spend the next weeks learning what the colors meant. Right now he was a deep, settled blue, calm, certain, the color of someone who has not been surprised in a very long time. He looked at each cadet in turn, moving around the room with his gaze at a pace that felt deliberate. When he got to me, he stopped. He looked at me for 4 full seconds. I counted. Then he picked up a flat data panel from the stand beside him, tapped it once, and read aloud without looking up. Cadet Claire Hadley, human, homeworld, Earth, surface gravity 9.8 meters per second squared, atmospheric composition, corrosive oxygen-nitrogen mix with trace particulates and significant biological contamination from surface organisms. Average species lifespan, 70 to 80 standard years, when not shortened by internal conflict, dietary dysfunction, or structural failure of their own cardiovascular system. He set the panel down and looked up. The entrance test scores are a curiosity. We will see if they mean anything in practice. A sound moved through the room. Not a laugh, not quite. Something between amusement and dismissal, light and brief and confident. It came from every direction at once and was over in less than 2 seconds. I kept my eyes on Velthara. I kept my face still. Inside, something was happening in my chest that I did not particularly want to examine closely, but outside I was a wall. He moved on. He introduced the program. 7 months of combat theory, physical training, tactical coordination, field simulation, and applied environmental assessment. Only 60% of the current intake would graduate. The rest would be returned to their homeworlds with a formal notification letter and a refund of transport costs. The Academy does not adjust its standards, Velthara said, walking the length of the room as he spoke, his 8 limbs moving in that smooth, coordinated pattern that still felt strange to watch. It does not lower performance bars to accommodate individual biology. If your species cannot meet the required threshold, that is a biological limitation, not an institutional failure. We are training officers, not participants. He paused at my end of the bench. We are very clear on that distinction, he said, to no one and specifically to me. I looked back at him. I thought about the barn. I thought about the second-hand kit. I thought about the entrance test score and the cut-out video feed and the early mornings alone in the cold when no one was watching, and I ran the assessments over and over until I knew exactly what my body could do. I thought about my grandmother, who had lived to 94 and been difficult every single day of it, and told me that the most dangerous thing in the world was to be underestimated by someone who was confident they were right. I thought, good. Velthara announced the first practical evaluation. Immediately, no preparation time. An obstacle course had been assembled at the rear of the training facility. I saw the problem with it the moment I looked. It was built for species with multiple limbs. The pressure plates in the floor required 3 points of simultaneous contact to activate. The climbing structures were spaced for a reach of at least 2 meters between grip points. The narrow gap sections assumed a lateral body profile of at least 80 centimeters, meaning I would have to turn sideways every time and lose speed doing it. Velthara announced that scoring would be based on completion time. He did not announce that the course was designed for bodies that were not mine. He did not need to. It was self-evident. I think that was the point. 20 cadets went before me. The fastest was a Grenkai cadet built like something that had been compressed into itself until it was very dense and very capable, named Braun. He finished in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The average across the 20 was around 5.5 minutes. I went last. I hit the first limb count pressure plate and used my knee as the third point of contact. It was inelegant. It worked. The climbing structure nearly stopped me because I had 60 centimeters less reach than the design assumed, so I used my shoes against the frame for friction and pulled myself up in shorter, faster movements, covering the same vertical distance in more steps. The narrow gaps I turned sideways for, but I tucked tight and moved quickly and lost less time than I expected. I crossed the line at 7 minutes and 12 seconds. Last place by a margin of 90 seconds. Velthara did not announce the rankings. He did not need to. The course had its own timer display visible to the room, and everyone had been watching. There was a long, still moment after I finished, the kind of moment that takes up more space than it has any right to. I pulled out my notebook. I wrote down every section where I had lost time. I noted the pressure plate solution. I noted the climbing deficit and the gap turn penalty. I wrote possible adjustments for the next attempt in small, clear letters. The cadet with 3 eyes glanced at the notebook. Her head tilted slowly to one side. Velthara noticed me writing. He walked across the floor and stood close enough that I was in his shadow. He looked at the notebook for a moment. "Recording your difficulties," he said. "Recording solutions," I said. He looked at the notebook a second longer. Then he walked away without another word. That night in the dormitory, I lay on a bed that was too wide for me because the standard bed frame was built for species with a broader physical profile. And I stared at the ceiling and went through every second of that course in my head. The pressure plates, the climbing sections, the narrow gaps, the exact number of centimeters I had lost at each transition point. I ran the numbers. With the right technique adjustments, I could cut 90 seconds off my time, possibly more. The room was quiet around me. The other cadets slept in their own ways. One of them clicked softly in a slow, rhythmic pattern that I eventually decided was a kind of snoring. I lay still and kept my breathing even and thought about the obstacle course, and thought about the look on Velthara's face when he had set down my file and said, "We will see if they mean anything in practice." I was going to show him what they meant. I set my body's internal clock, the one that 19 years of early mornings had calibrated to a fine edge, for 5 hours before the official program wake time. I closed my eyes. There was work to do, and I intended to start it before anyone else in the building was awake to watch. 3 weeks into the program, Velthara found a new use for me. I became his demonstration. It began in the third session of combat theory, when he was teaching the class a ground-level defense technique specific to Korathi anatomy. The technique used 2 of the lower limbs to pin an opponent's movement, while the upper limbs executed the response. When he wanted to show how effectively it worked against a smaller opponent, he called me to the front. The first time, I assumed it was practical. The instructor needed someone to work with, and I was available. By the third time, I had updated that assumption entirely. He always called me. He called me when he was explaining why 2-limbed locomotion created predictable vulnerability zones in close-quarters situations. He called me when he was illustrating the load-capacity difference between human skeletal structure and the heavily plated Grenkai build. He called me forward to stand beside the course completion chart and let the class compare my time to bronze, while he talked about the relationship between limb count and multi-point coordination efficiency. Every time, he kept his tone educational, never cruel in a way that could be quoted, just informative, just accurate in the specific and selective way that leaves out all the context that would change what the accuracy means. The strange thing was that it was working for me as well. I was being physically handled by a decorated instructor every single day. Velthara's techniques were excellent. When he used a ground method on me, I felt exactly where the force was applied, which angle drove it, where the counterforce had to come from to disrupt it. When he showed a pressure point deflection, I learned it through my own body, not through a diagram or a description. I was learning from the inside of every technique he used on me. By the time I was supposed to be the passive subject of a demonstration, I was actually its most attentive student. I said nothing about this. When Velthara finished with me, I got up, straightened my jacket, and walked back to my position on the bench. Bron watched me from across the training floor with those small, careful dark eyes. Grenkai faces did not move in ways I had learned to read yet, but the quality of his attention had changed between the first week and the third. It was no longer the ambient, dismissive glance that circled the room and included me incidentally. It was something more specific, more curious. After the fourth demonstration session, when I walked back to the bench, he gave a small, slow nod, the kind that said, "I see what is happening here." I nodded back. Outside of training hours, I was running the obstacle course alone. The facility was technically open during personal time. No rule prohibited it. I went in the early morning while the corridors were still quiet and the light strips were on their overnight setting, and the course sat empty in the pale half-dark. I ran it over and over. I tested the knee-lock pressure plate solution until my body did it without needing to think about it. I worked the climbing sections until my grip stopped slipping at the upper transition. I ran the narrow gap turns until I was losing almost no time on them. The first morning I went alone, the facility was not quite empty. A maintenance unit was working along the far wall, a slow-moving machine with multiple tool arms that was replacing a section of floor panel. It did not acknowledge me. I did not acknowledge it. I ran the course 6 times and left before anyone arrived for the official session. Second morning, the facility was completely empty. I ran the course 8 times. By the 8th run, I had found a rhythm in the pressure plates that my body recognized without my mind having to direct it. The knee lock was becoming automatic. That was what I was looking for. Automatic was faster than deliberate. Deliberate meant thinking, and thinking meant a fraction of a second of processing time before the action, and that fraction compounded across 42 pressure plate activations in a single run. The third morning, Braun was in the facility when I arrived. He was at the far end, working on a different section of the training floor, practicing a Genkai close-quarters positioning technique that required a specific pattern of weight shifts. He looked up when I came in. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything. He went back to his work. I went to the course. He was there the next morning too, and the one after that. We shared the facility in silence for a week and a half, working at opposite ends, without acknowledgement and without interference. I found this unexpectedly comfortable. By the end of the second week of morning sessions, I had cut 1 minute and 7 seconds off my time. I did not tell anyone. Valthara ran his verbal assessments in the third week. He chose several cadets after each session and delivered a public evaluation of their performance in front of the whole group. The evaluations were given in a tone that implied he was doing the cadets a favor by being precise. He was not wrong about the technical observations he made. He had an excellent eye for detail and a clean ability to identify exactly where a technique was failing. The problem was his framing, which treated every gap as a fixed characteristic rather than a current position. When he reached me, he said I was demonstrating admirable persistence given the constraints of my physiology. He said it with the mild, clinical appreciation you might give a plant that was growing reasonably well in difficult soil. No one laughed. I noticed this specifically. The ambient dismissal that had followed his comments about me in the first week had been fatting, not because Valthara's tone had changed, because of something that happens in any room when one person keeps showing up and doing the work and does not collapse under the pressure. People start watching differently. They stop adding their own weight to what is already being carried. The cadet with 3 eyes, whose name I had learned was Sovi, was ranked 4th in the class by the end of the third week. She was a species I had not known before arriving, long-limbed with silver skin that caught the light at certain angles and a way of thinking through problems geometrically, breaking them into component angles and forces, that was different from how I approached things but fitted neatly beside it. She had also, I had noticed, never participated in the background current of dismissal that followed Valthara's comments about me. Not with enthusiasm, not with discomfort, simply not at all. She sat beside me one afternoon during the theory lecture on atmospheric combat protocols. "Your obstacle course time is improving," she said quietly. I looked at her. "I have 4th rank program access," she said. "The facility monitoring logs are visible at that level. I was reviewing usage data for a training pattern analysis, and your morning sessions appeared in the records." "But you looked at the times," I said. "They were notable," she said. "You have cut 93 seconds since the first session." "I need 40 more," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, which section?" I told her about the climbing structure problem, the reach deficit, the way I had compensated with shoe friction, but was still losing time at the upper transition because my angle of approach was wrong. Sovi thought about it as a geometric problem. She described the angle differently than I had been seeing it. She said that if I approached the frame from 15 degrees further left on the entry, I would have a mechanical advantage at the upper grip point that would reduce the effective pull distance by a meaningful amount. I tried it the next morning. She was right. After that, Sovi sometimes came to the facility in the early hours, not every morning. Sometimes. She would bring her scanner and run environmental calibration checks on the atmospheric processors while I ran the course, which was within her program access permissions, and gave her a legitimate reason to be there at that hour. She never ran the course herself. She watched the approach angles and occasionally said something precise and useful between my runs. I did not ask why she had started coming. She did not explain. Some things did not require explanation. On one of those mornings, about a week and a half after she first appeared, she said, "Velthara reviewed your morning session logs yesterday." I stopped at the end of the course. I turned. "The facility access logs show instructor review flags," she said. "Someone with instructor clearance looked at the usage data for your training sessions. The timestamp was in the late evening." I thought about what that meant. Velthara reviewing my times privately in the late evening, not announcing it, not using it in a session, just looking. "What were the times he saw?" I asked. "The most recent 3 sessions," Sovi said. She named the times. They were good times, significantly better than what I had run on the first day. Still not where I needed them to be, but moving in the right direction with visible consistency. "He said nothing in the morning session," I said. "No," Sovi said. She went back to her scanner calibration. I thought about that for a moment. Then I started the next run. I still did not tell Velthara my time had improved. He had looked at the data himself. If he had chosen to say nothing, then nothing was what he wanted to say, and I had no interest in forcing a conversation that he was not ready to have. Things would develop in their own time. They always did. That was his first significant mistake, building a model on the first day and not revisiting it. The second mistake arrived at the end of the 3rd week, in the form of Delegate Oren. She came from the Galactic Council's Education Oversight Division, small for her species, pale and self-contained, with a data recorder that never left her hand and the quality of attention that belongs to someone trained professionally to notice what other people overlook. She sat at the back of the room during sessions and said almost nothing, and watched everything with the patience of someone who understands that the most interesting things usually happen when the room has stopped performing for observers. Velthara addressed the class with her present. He covered the Academy's training philosophy and practiced precise language. He talked about species capability mapping, biological and cognitive assessment, the scientific basis for the program's performance standards. He said the Academy's record of producing the Galactic Fleet's finest officers was built on the rigorous application of objective criteria. Then he used me as his example. "The human cadet," he said, standing at the center of the room with Delegate Oren's recorder visible behind him, provides a useful illustration of the challenges inherent in cross-species training environments. Earth is a geologically active world with a relatively dense atmosphere and surface conditions that produce a species with certain adaptive characteristics. However, the structural limitations of 2-limbed locomotion, combined with the shorter operational stamina window of human physiology under sustained high-intensity load, create consistent performance gaps in a training environment calibrated for the galactic standard. He said it cleanly. He said it like a research paper. He said it without looking at me once. Delegate Oren wrote something on her recorder. I sat with my hands in my lap and counted my heartbeats for a moment, a technique my father had taught me for situations when stillness was what the room needed and what my body was not naturally inclined toward. I thought about the barn. I thought about the early mornings. I thought about what I had written in my notebook on the very first day, recording solutions. Velthara moved on to the next section of his address. I looked at the back of his head and thought, I am going to give you a much better case study than the one you just used in front of that recorder. 3 days after Delegate Oren arrived, Velthara gave me the opening. He announced the mid-program field simulation, the evaluation that separated the first tier of cadets from the rest. Top performers would advance to the elite tactical unit stream. The others would continue in the standard track. The scenario was a search and rescue operation on a hostile atmosphere planetary surface. Teams were assigned specific roles: command, technical support, perimeter control, medical response. Velthara read the individual assignments from his panel. He assigned me civilian. Not rescue team, not perimeter, not technical support. Civilian, the person to be rescued. There was a pause in the room. Bron shifted to my left. Sovi, 3 seats down, went completely still. Even cadets who had been largely indifferent to my situation were quiet. Velthara looked at me across the space with that deep, settled blue. "Is the assignment clear, Cadet Hadley?" "Clear," I said. The almost smile that crossed his face was brief and certain. He had no idea what he had just handed me. The simulation floor was impressive work. The Academy's field simulation unit had constructed a scaled environment that was genuinely disorientating. Floor tiles that shifted slightly underfoot, mimicking unstable terrain, with an irregular pattern that was difficult to predict without watching for a full 30 seconds. Heat generation units placed throughout the zone raised the ambient temperature in measured stages. Atmospheric processors released a dense compound into the air, non-toxic by program design, but heavy enough to make breathing a conscious effort rather than an automatic one. The compound pressed against the lungs with each inhale. Several cadets near the entry point were already adjusting their posture to compensate, working harder just to maintain a comfortable breathing rhythm. I walked into the zone and let my body run its own quiet inventory. Temperature elevated, the kind of heat that pushes back against exposed skin and makes the air feel thick, uncomfortable in the way that a very hot afternoon is uncomfortable, not dangerous. My body noted it and filed it under manage. Air density, heavy. My lungs were working noticeably harder. I adjusted my breathing without thinking about it. Slower inhales, complete exhales, the pattern I had found years earlier running on the hills above my town in fog so thick it felt like moving through wet cloth. Ground stability, inconsistent. I shortened my stride automatically, redistributing weight more carefully with each step. The shifting tiles had a roughly predictable cycle if you watched them for 30 seconds before stepping onto them. I watched. Then I stepped. I had grown up in northern England. The ground there freezes in winter and breaks apart in the thaw and comes back wrong, soft and unreliable in patches that look solid until you are on them. I had trained for the academy in a barn with no heating and a door that did not close properly, running assessments in every kind of weather. Because the program did not pause for weather and neither did I. 19 years of a planet that did not adjust itself had built a working relationship between my body and discomfort that most of the cadets in this room did not have because their planets had been more cooperative. This was hard. Hard was not a reason to stop. I found my position as the civilian target and waited for the scenario to begin. The signal came. The rescue teams deployed. Bron led the perimeter unit, which seemed natural because his physical presence established a boundary without anyone needing to think about it. Sovi was at the technical support station, positioned at the edge of the zone, running environmental readings and feeding data to the command unit. Command was led by Dale, a cadet whose species I had not interacted with much, but who moved through the chaos of the scenario launch with the organized, decisive authority of someone trained specifically for this role. For 12 minutes, the operation ran cleanly. Teams communicated. Scanned data came in clearly. The rescue path was being established along the planned route with good coordination. Then Velthara activated the complication. The low alarm from the environmental processors came first. Then the atmospheric density in a specific subsection of the simulation floor spiked sharply upward, a sudden thickening that was almost visible in the quality of the air. The heat units in that section increased their output, and the floor tiles in the affected area began a destabilization cycle, shifting and tilting in an irregular pattern that was no longer background noise, but something that required active management with every step. In the center of that affected subsection sat the simulation's critical infrastructure point, a signal relay unit, a physical box with a connection port and manual activation inputs. Without it, the rescue operation could not accurately locate and extract the civilian target, which was me. I could see the problem immediately from where I stood. The affected zone was effectively impassable for most of the species on the rescue team. The atmospheric density alone would push their respiratory systems past comfortable function quickly. The heat was above the thermal tolerance threshold for both Korathi and Grenkai physiology. The floor instability was particularly severe for multi-limbed species, because more contact points meant more chances to hit a shifting tile at the wrong moment. Dale assessed the zone from the boundary. He called Sovi for a technical read. Sovi's response came back in seconds, precise and clean. Conditions in subsection 4 are beyond safe operational parameters for all assigned team members. Atmospheric density is 300% above baseline zone standard. Thermal output is 40 degrees above Grenkai threshold. Floor instability index is in the critical range. Dale said, there must be an alternative approach route to the relay. Sovi said, there is not. The relay is centrally placed. All approach vectors run through the affected zone. There is no routing option. Silence on the command channel. The kind of silence that forms when capable people are realizing the correct answer does not exist within the set of solutions they prepared for. Velthara watched from the observation deck above the simulation floor. I could not see his expression from where I stood. I did not need to. I knew the posture, arms folded, weight balanced, completely certain that what he was watching was the scenario achieving its intended result. I looked at the affected zone. I looked at my hands. I thought about 19 years on a planet that had never once arranged itself to be convenient for the things living on it. I started walking. Not slowly, not with any performance in it. I just started walking towards subsection for the way you walk towards something you have already decided about, with your weight forward and your eyes on where you are going. Sovi's voice came immediately through the team channel. Cadet Hadley, the zone parameters are beyond safe operational thresholds. I heard the parameters, I said. Claire, that was Braun, and he had dropped the formal address without seeming to notice. His voice was lower than usual. The protocol designates you as the asset to be extracted. You are not a responder. The protocol, I said, was written for a different kind of civilian. I stepped into the affected zone. The heat arrived properly then, a thick, pressing wave of it that hit my face and the skin of my hands and pushed hard. Not just warmth, something with weight behind it, like standing too close to an open furnace. My skin registered it as a warning. I acknowledged the warning and kept moving. I breathed through it. My body did not enjoy the situation, but my body was not the decision maker. The heavy air needed to be managed actively. I slowed my breathing, made each breath count, did not waste effort on fast, shallow pulls that would give me less oxygen than I needed and cost more energy than I had to spare. The floor shifted under my left foot at the second step. I felt it tilt and shifted my weight to the right instantly without breaking stride. The muscle memory for that particular recovery was built in deep from years of uneven ground. Frozen thaw ground. Hillside ground that looked solid and was not. Ground that moved because ground is not the stable thing you assume it is when you have grown up on a planet that is still deciding what shape it wants to be. I watched the tile pattern ahead. It had a rhythm. Not a clean one, not one I could set a clock to, but a rhythm in the way that all physical systems have one if you watch long enough. I read it. I moved with it instead of against it, timing my steps to the relative stability that opened and closed between shifts. Behind me, on the communication line, I could hear the team channel had gone quiet. No one was telling me to stop anymore. They were watching. Dale's voice came after a moment, low and focused. Cadet Hadley. Relay is 40 meters in on a bearing of approximately 210 degrees from the zone entry. Acknowledged, I said. I kept walking. The air grew heavier as I moved deeper. It pressed differently here, not just in the lungs but against the eardrums, a slight pressure that would have been distracting if I had let it be. I did not let it be. I noted it the way I noted the heat. Filed under manage. Moved on. The visibility inside the affected zone was slightly reduced by the density of the atmospheric compound. Not fog exactly, more like looking through very warm glass. Shapes were clear at 5 meters, less defined at 10. I shortened my assessment horizon and focused on the immediate path. At approximately 15 meters in, I passed through the densest section of the atmospheric processor's output. The compound was at its maximum concentration here. Breathing required genuine deliberate effort, the kind you use when you are doing something hard and you know it is hard and you choose to do it anyway. I breathed in for 4 steps, breathed out for 4, breathed in for 4. This was a rhythm I had learned on cold morning runs when the air came so fast and sharp that breathing carelessly meant cramps that would stop you cold. The principle translated. The floor in this section was also at its most unstable, tiles shifting in overlapping cycles, one going up while its neighbor went sideways, the pattern complex enough that reading it required my full attention. I slowed my pace here, not because I was losing nerve, because the situation required accuracy more than speed and I knew the difference. I reached the signal relay in 1 minute and 44 seconds. It was a physical unit about the size of a large storage box, gray-green in color, with a connection port on the top face and manual inputs arranged in a row across the front panel. A small display screen showed the activation instructions. 6 steps in a specific sequence, with confirmation indicators between each one. The instructions were written in the standard galactic notation that was part of every cadet's first week orientation module. I had read that module twice on the transport ship. I read the instructions once on the display screen. I entered the sequence. My hands were steady. I noticed this specifically and then stopped noticing it and finished the sequence. The relay activated, a green indicator lit on the panel, a second one, a third. All 6 confirmation lights came up in a row. Sovi's voice came through the channel, and the careful precision that was her baseline had shifted into something that was still controlled, but that held something different underneath it. The sound of someone speaking while simultaneously revising a significant number of things they had believed to be settled. Signal restored. Rescue path is confirmed. Good, I said. I turned and walked back out of the affected zone. The path out was the same path in, which meant I already knew it. I moved faster on the return. The floor pattern was familiar now. The breathing rhythm was established. The heat was the same heat it had been on the way in, and my body had already adjusted its baseline to account for it. I crossed the zone boundary at 2 minutes and 51 seconds from the moment I had entered. Dale had already begun re-establishing the extraction route. The teams reorganized with the speed of people who had been waiting for exactly this. Braun tightened the perimeter. Sovi's data feed resumed with the confirmed coordinates. The operation ran. I stood at the edge of the simulation floor. I breathed. I let my body process what had happened in the way it needed to, heat dissipating from the skin, breathing returning toward baseline, the specific tiredness of genuine physical effort settling into my arms and legs like something earned. The rescue completed within the required time window. The scenario alarm sounded and then cut off. The simulation closed. And the room went quiet in a way I had not heard from it before. Not the silence of dismissal or polite discomfort, or the background ambient indifference that had been the texture of my first weeks here. This silence had a different quality. It was the silence of a room full of people who have just watched something they did not have a category for, who are standing in the gap between what they expected to happen and what actually did, trying to work out what to do with the space between those two things. It was the best kind of silence. I had been working toward it for 3 weeks. Then from the observation deck above, I heard Velthara begin the descent. His footsteps were slower than usual. Velthara did not come to me immediately. He went to the data station first. He stood there with his back to the room for what felt like close to 4 minutes, reviewing the simulation logs on the wide display panel. The screen showed biosign readouts, movement tracking, time stamps, Environmental stress data. I could see enough of the edge of it to know what he was looking at. No one in the room spoke. Every cadet was in their place, watching Velthara's back instead of each other. Even Bron, who moved through most situations with the easy physical confidence of someone who has never needed to be nervous about a room, had gone completely still. Sophie stood near the technical station with her scanner held in both hands and her eyes fixed at a point just above Velthara's shoulder. I stood where I had been. I was not going anywhere. Velthara's color had changed. The deep, settled blue that was his baseline of calm authority was gone. What replaced it was something I had not seen on him before. A pale, fractured pattern that moved across his skin in irregular waves, like light reflected through broken water, unsteady and shifting. I did not know the Korathi vocabulary for that pattern. I did not need to. The meaning was visible without the words. He turned from the data station and looked at me. I had thought about this moment in the abstract, the way you think about things when you are trying not to plan too carefully. I had considered various possibilities: cold dismissal, technical precision that minimized the significance of what had happened, a procedural note about the civilian protocol I had technically violated by leaving my assigned position. I had not thought he would look the way he did. He looked like someone who had been carrying a wrong answer for a long time and had just discovered the error. Not defeated. More like the moment after understanding arrives and before you know what to do with it. The weight of having been certain and then being shown the certainty was built on a calculation that missed something. He walked across the simulation floor. The cadets around the edges stayed very still. He stopped in front of me. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone gathering a speech, the silence of someone who has lost the speech they prepared. Your biosign data during the subsection transit, he said. Yes. Your stress response indicators were elevated. Heart rate, cortisol output, respiratory compensation, all elevated. Yes, I said, it was stressful. But within functional operational range. Yes. The atmospheric density was 3 times the baseline zone standard. Approximately. The thermal output was 41 degrees above your species' comfortable range. It was warm, I said. Something moved through his expression, not quite the shape of anything I had a precise name for. How, he said. It was the genuine question. The one that means I had a model and you have shown me the model was incomplete, and I need to understand where the gap was. Not a challenge, an actual request to understand. I had been waiting for that question since the first day I walked through his door. I told him about Earth. I told him without making it a lecture, because lecturing him was not what this was. I told him about the gravity. Not the number, he already had the number in my file, but the reality of it. 9.8 meters per second squared is not significant if you look at it from outside. If you are born inside it, it is the permanent condition of your existence from your first breath. Every bone in a human body develops under that load. Every muscle calibrates to it from the beginning of life. A human does not notice the weight because we have never known anything different, and our bodies have been shaped across millions of years to carry it as standard, as background, as the baseline that everything else is built on top of. You see a two-limbed species and you see reduced stability, I said. What you are actually looking at is a species that stands upright under conditions that would require most species to actively brace. We are not underpowered. We are loaded differently, and we have been loaded that way for so long that the loading has become the architecture. I told him about the climate, not as a complaint because it was not a complaint, it was a description of what produces what. Earth is geologically young in the way that matters for biology, meaning it is still restless, still capable of fire and flood and temperature swings, and the kind of atmospheric events that make it very clear, very quickly, that the planet does not know you are there. The species that made it through these conditions did not do so by finding the safe corners. They did so by becoming capable of managing the unsafe ones. We were never the apex of our environment, I said. There were things bigger than us, faster than us, better armed by birth than us. We survive them because we adapt, because we recover, because our biology is built around continued function under load rather than optimal performance under ideal conditions. Everything you have categorized as a limitation in my file is the surface reading of something that operates differently from how you assumed. Velthara was listening in the way that meant he was actually processing what he heard, not waiting for the pause that signaled he could speak. His color had settled from the fractured pale into something quieter and deeper, a shade I had not seen on him before this conversation. "You said nothing," he said, "during the assessments, during the demonstration sessions. You said nothing to dispute the framing." What would I have said? You could have argued that the evaluation criteria were weighted toward multi-limbed physiology. They were, I said. That is not an argument, it is an observation. An observation does not change the course. I changed instead. You could have filed a formal complaint with the program administrators. I considered it, I admitted. I decided the time and attention were more useful elsewhere. You were recording solutions, he said, slowly. He had remembered, from the first day, the notebook, the question at the end of the obstacle course run. I had not expected him to have retained that particular detail. Yes, I said. He held very still. Another silence, longer this time. The simulation floor was completely quiet around us. I was aware of the room watching, but I was not distracted by it. This was the only conversation in the space that mattered. I made a significant error in my assessment, Velthara said. It was not a full apology. It was something harder than an apology in some ways. It was an accurate statement from someone not accustomed to making inaccurate statements, acknowledging openly that one had been made and sustained and acted upon. From Velthara, given what I had observed of his character over 3 weeks, this was not a small thing to say. Yes, I said. He held very still. I think he expected me to press further, to use the acknowledgement as a lever toward something else. I did not. The acknowledgement existed. It had its own weight. Adding pressure would only have reduced it. You are not angry, he said. I am a little angry, I said honestly, but it is not the most useful thing I am. Something moved in his expression, a brief, small shift that I could not fully name. The beginning of something, maybe respect, maybe the particular quality of surprise that comes from being genuinely and completely wrong about someone you believed you had already understood. A quiet movement came from the direction of the data station. Delegate Oren had moved from her observer position during the conversation. She had relocated to the technical station without announcing it, her recorder positioned in a way that I now understood had been capturing the room throughout the debrief. She looked up when the room became aware of her. She looked at both of us without emphasis. I will be filing my observation report, she said, in the same calm, precise tone she used for everything. It will include a detailed section on adaptive performance under non-standard environmental conditions. The cadet responsible for the critical action in this simulation will be named specifically. She looked at me, then at Velthara. I will also be recommending a review of the baseline assumptions in this program's foundational assessment design, she said, specifically regarding the relationship between locomotion type, limb configuration, and multi-environment operational capacity. This is not a criticism of the Academy. It is a curriculum development observation, arising from direct evidence produced by this program. She said it pleasantly. She said it the way very experienced people say things that are actually quite significant without raising the temperature of the room by a single degree. Velthara said nothing. Delegate Oren closed her recorder. She gave a single inclusive nod to both of us, assigning us equal standing in it, and walked back to the rear of the room. Velthara stood in the silence she left. Then he looked at me. The commendation that will accompany the delegate's report will require an instructor signature, he said. I know, I said. I will sign it. "I know," I said again. He looked at me for one more moment. There was something happening in the quality of his gaze that I had not seen in it before. Not warmth exactly. Korathi expressions did not map neatly onto human ones, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. But there was a quality to it that was different from any way he had looked at me in 3 weeks of training. It was the look of someone who is seeing the actual shape of a thing instead of the shape they had assigned it. He turned and walked back toward the data station. I was aware, in the specific way you become aware of things when a room is very quiet and you are the center of it, that no one had moved. 39 cadets on the benches and at stations around the edges of the simulation floor, all of them still, all of them carrying what they had just watched. Some of them had been part of the operation. Sovi, Braun, Dale and his command unit. Tim, who had been in the perimeter group alongside Braun. They had been in the zone when it happened. They had been on the channel. They had heard everything. The others had watched from their positions, and watching, it turned out, had been enough. Dale crossed the floor toward me. He was not the kind of person who made unnecessary movements, and crossing the room now was not unnecessary. He stopped in front of me. "Good call," he said, direct and clean the way he did everything. "Thank you," I said. He went back to his station without ceremony. I stood in place for a moment. Then I looked across the room and found Sovi. She was watching me with the complete stillness of someone who has just updated a significant number of working assumptions all at once. Her 3 eyes held the kind of attention that meant she was not going to stop thinking about this for a long time. Braun was beside her. He raised one large hand in that slow, certain Grenkai acknowledgement, held it, lowered it. Tim was behind them. He said nothing. He did not need to. I walked to the medical checkpoint. Standard procedure after any simulation with elevated environmental stress. The attending staff cleared me in 12 minutes. Manageable thermal stress. Normal recovery trajectory. One bruise on my right leg that I had not noticed acquiring. The medic noted it on her panel with the expression of someone choosing not to say the thing they were thinking. I was cleared. I walked back to the dormitory in the evening light of a planet that was not mine and thought about 2 words. Can you? Not 11 minutes of assessment. Not a careful diplomatic construction of whether the human might perhaps be suitable for consideration. Just, can you? And the answer had been yes. And we had both been right. I thought about the notebook on the first day, recording solutions. The question Velthara had asked when he saw it, the almost dismissive version of the question, as though noting difficulties was the charitable interpretation of what I was doing. And I had told him, recording solutions. He had walked away without a word. Now he was going to sign a commendation. I did not feel triumphant about this. Triumph was not the right shape for what I felt. It was something quieter and more complete. The feeling that comes not from winning, but from having the correct answer confirmed. From having done the work in the cold and the dark for weeks, and then standing at the end of it and finding that the work had been real. That it had added up to something actual rather than just the hope that it would. I sat on the 2-wide bed and opened my notebook. I did not write about the simulation. I wrote about the climbing section of the obstacle course and the angle approach Sovi had suggested, and whether 3 minutes flat was achievable by the end of the following week, or whether the more realistic target was 5 seconds higher and I should focus instead on the transition between the climbing frame and the gap section, which was costing me 4 seconds, and which I had not yet found the solution for. 4 seconds was solvable. It always was. You just had to be patient enough with the problem to find the specific place where it was actually solved. I put the notebook away and lay back. I thought about my grandmother, about the barn, about 19 years of a planet that had never once asked whether the conditions were convenient before producing them. I thought about what that planet had built. Every species that had ever looked at a human and seen a limitation had looked at the surface. They had seen the 2 limbs and the modest size and the absence of natural armor and read the file. Earth. Surface gravity 9.8, lifespan 70 to 80 years, corrosive atmospheric composition, two-limbed locomotion. They had not understood what the file was actually saying. Which was, this species came from a place that kept trying to stop them and could not. Which was, everything you see is the result of millions of years of refusing to be stopped. Which was, we did not arrive here by being easy to break. The ceiling was pale and plain. The room was quiet. The clicking snore had started from somewhere in the far corner of the dormitory, steady and familiar now, a small landmark in the dark. I closed my eyes. 4 weeks after the field simulation, the training room looked the same but was not. The high ceiling, the long blue light strips, the pale textured floor, Velthara at the center, 40 cadets on the benches, which had become 39 because one had left the program for medical reasons in the week following the simulation. But the room was different in the specific way that rooms become different when something real has happened in them, and everyone who was present still carries it. The obstacle course had a new section. It appeared one morning without announcement. A set of single-point pressure plates, calibrated for two-limbed activation, requiring the kind of precise, rapid single-foot placement that comes naturally to a body built around two-limbed balance. A climbing structure with variable grip spacing, no single reach length optimized for, so that different body types face different challenges at different points along the frame. A gap section built at multiple widths, so that cadets who had previously moved through the narrowest points, without slowing down, now faced a wide gap that required a proper running stride. Velthara never mentioned the new sections, no entry in the training schedule, no explanation in any session. I ran the course the next morning and found them and ran them twice. Then I sat at the edge of the floor with my notebook and thought about what it meant that they were there. It meant someone had done the work quietly and had not made it a gesture. In the theory lectures, Velthara's examples began to shift. Not immediately. Over 2 weeks, the range of species used as reference points in his teaching expanded slowly and without announcement. High-gravity world adaptations appeared as a scientific case study in Session 9. Earth appeared by name in Session 11 as a reference point for evolutionary pressure responses to hostile surface conditions. Velthara presented it as data, the way he presented everything. His tone did not change. His pace did not change. He did not look at me while he talked about it. I noticed that he also did not deliberately avoid looking at me. He simply spoke about it with the same level of attention he gave all material, as though it had always been part of the curriculum, as though he had always considered it worth including. Cadets began to sit near me at meals. Sophie had started it without announcing it. She brought her tray to my table 2 days after the simulation and sat down, and immediately began a technical conversation about the upcoming navigation module as though we had always eaten lunch together, and had simply resumed mid-discussion. No ceremony. She had decided that proximity was appropriate, and had enacted the decision the way she enacted all decisions, directly and without wasting time on the process. Braun followed 2 days later. He required 2 standard seat frames positioned side by side, which he arranged without asking permission and sat across from me and said, "The new single-point pressure plates. The calibration is 2 kilograms off for your body weight." 58 kilograms, I said. He thought about this. I am compensating with a faster strike angle. Show me tomorrow, he said. It was not quite a request. An invitation stated in the way of someone not accustomed to framing invitations. All right, I said. Tim arrived at the table 3 days after Braun. He set his tray down, looked around at all of us and said, "I see this is where the interesting people have ended up." Then he began eating without waiting for a response. Petra came next, studying environmental systems, with focused opinions about atmospheric regulation and the particular enthusiasm of someone who had finally found people who would not redirect the conversation. Then Owen, quiet and methodical, the best navigator in the program, who had apparently decided proximity to me was tactically useful because I was always identifying the most efficient path through any situation. I had not performed camaraderie to make this happen. I had not sought out company or shaped myself into something more accessible. I had simply done the work and been honest about what I was doing, and at some point the room had organized itself differently around that. My obstacle course time, by the 5th week after the simulation, was 3 minutes and 4 seconds. Braun did not know. We had been running morning sessions together since the pressure plate conversation, and our times had been converging, but I had not made a point of the gap. Some things were better discovered at the right moment. The right moment was not something I could schedule. It arrived on an ordinary evening. Most cadets were in personal training time. The facility was busy with scattered individual work. Braun decided to run the obstacle course and announced this by simply standing up and moving toward the course entry point. Tim looked at me, raised one small limb in the direction Braun was heading. The gesture clearly meant, well then. I stood up. Braun heard me and turned. He assessed the situation in the way he assessed everything, quickly and without excess. Then he said, "You are joining me." "Unless you would rather not," I said. His face moved in that limited, complicated Grenkai way. Not irritation. The recalibrating expression of someone who has just understood that a training session is about to be more informative than they planned for. "I would not rather not," he said. We ran it simultaneously, same start signal, same course. I finished in 3 minutes and 1 second, a personal best. Braun finished in 3 minutes and 36, also a personal best. The pause after we both crossed the line was long. We were breathing hard. The training floor around us had gone quiet in the way it goes quiet when something is happening that is worth attending to. The junior instructor supervising the session had stopped moving and was standing still with his notes forgotten. Braun looked at me. I looked at Braun. 3 minutes and 1, he said. "Yes," I said. Another pause. "When did it become 3 minutes and 1, he said. Gradually, I said, "Mornings." He was quiet. Then, "What time do you start?" 5 before official wake, I said. He thought about this. "I will be there tomorrow." "All right," I said. We walked back together. Tim made the quiet sound of appreciation. Sophie glanced up from her scanner and then back down, which communicated quite a lot for someone using no words. Owen gave a short, precise nod. Velthara was not there that evening. He did not need to be. What was built did not need observation to exist. It had been built in the cold of early mornings that no one watched, in the accumulated weight of every second shaved from a time that no one was present to applaud, in every notebook entry written in the quiet while others slept. That was the thing about people from difficult places, not the dramatic moments. Those were just the surface. The thing underneath was the long, unspectacular work, the kind that happens before anyone is watching, the kind that no one celebrates because no one is there to see it happening. Earth had never applauded us either. It had just kept being exactly what it was, difficult, ungentle, and real, and we had kept getting up in the morning, kept running the course, kept writing down solutions instead of complaints. 3 weeks after the evening course run, the real emergency came. Not a simulation, no posted parameters, no scenario boundary markers. A field exercise team had gone to the practice terrain on the planet's surface for an advanced navigation module. 2 cadets and their supervising instructor, a decorated officer named Nail who had been running field exercises at the academy for years. The terrain was assessed, the weather was stable, the geological survey of the practice area was on file and showed nothing of concern. 4 hours into the exercise, the surface changed. A subsurface instability, the kind that develops on a longer timescale than standard geological surveys sample, had been building undetected beneath a section of the practice terrain. It reached its threshold, and the ground opened along a fault line. The shift was rapid. Nail went down into the resulting gap before either cadet could reach her. She was alive. The emergency beacon confirmed it. She was conscious and communicating on the short-range channel. But the fault zone that had formed created a pocket environment that the initial atmospheric analysis confirmed as high pressure, thermally elevated, and chemically dense in a way that placed it outside the safe operational parameters for every species in the surface team. The Academy Emergency Response Unit arrived and assessed the situation for 11 minutes. I was at the perimeter checkpoint with a group of off-module cadets who had been redirected when the emergency signal went out. I watched the response lead run calculations. I watched 2 team members consult over environmental readouts. I watched the third go to the fault edge, look in, and come back with a specific kind of stillness on his face. After 11 minutes, the formal acknowledgement came. No available responder had the physiological profile for safe entry into the fault zone. Extraction by standard means was not possible. They were working on alternatives. Velthara arrived at the perimeter from the command vehicle. He reviewed the response team's assessment. He looked at the fault zone. He looked at his team. He looked at the assessment data again. Then he looked at me. No preamble, no careful construction, no diplomatic framing of the question. "Can you?" he said. 2 words. I thought about what was in the fault zone. High pressure, elevated temperature, chemical density that was heavy but not acutely toxic to human biology in short exposures. Unstable footing at the fault edge where the ground had fractured and tilted at wrong angles. Nail was 40 meters in on a ledge formation, the beacon coordinates confirmed. I thought about my body, about what it was, about what it had been built to be by a planet that had never made things easy. "Yes," I said. Velthara gave me the equipment without delay. A compressed communication line for position tracking, a light extraction harness, 1 operator design, an environmental mask to handle the chemical atmosphere. I went in. The heat arrived at the entry point. I walked through it. I breathed through the mask and felt the pressure settle against me from all sides and treated it the way I had treated the simulation atmosphere, not something to resist, something to move through on its own terms. The footing at the fault edge was fractured and tilted. I moved slowly. Slow was accurate. Accurate was faster than the alternative. I timed my weight shifts to the spaces of stability between the settling movements of the broken rock, which was still adjusting as the fault found its new position. I reached Nail in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She was on a ledge about 60 centimeters wide, wedged against the fault wall, 1 leg pinned under collapsed surface material. She was breathing with visible effort. She looked at me when I came around the last turn. Her expression required no translation. I talked to her while I worked. Practical information, not comfort. I told her what I was moving first, what I needed her upper body to do, when to hold still and when to shift her weight and when to let mine carry the load. She followed every instruction with the clean, precise compliance of someone who has assessed the situation completely and chosen to trust without reservation. The pinned section was the main problem, a dense, awkward slab resting on her leg at an angle that made direct lifting counterproductive. I looked at it for 30 seconds. I worked out the angle. I positioned the harness line as a lever along the lower edge of the slab, using the harness hardware as the fulcrum point, which was not its designed function, but the physics were sound. I pulled. The slab rotated. Nail got her leg clear. I got the harness on her. I talked her through the extraction route while I navigated it for both of us. 40 meters back through the broken terrain, with her weight on mine at the sections where her leg would not hold. I did not stop to think about whether it was working. It was working. Thinking about it would have used attention I needed for the ground. We came out into open air. The response team moved immediately. They took Nail with practiced efficiency and moved her to the medical unit. I stood at the fault edge for a moment and breathed. The clean air after the chemical density was extraordinary in its ordinariness, and I was grateful for it in a way I had never been grateful for ordinary air before. Velthara was at the perimeter line. I walked to him and stopped. He looked at me for a long moment. The fractured water-like color was not on him now. What he was instead was something simpler and steadier. A deep, dark shade I was beginning to understand as the one that meant he was looking at something and actually seeing it clearly. Debriefed and medical check, he said. 20 minutes. Yes, I said. He turned to organize the response team. I took 3 steps and stopped. Bron was there. Sovi was beside him. Tim was behind them. They had been at the perimeter through the whole operation. Sovi looked at me with the complete precision of her full attention. Bron raised his hand in the slow, certain Grenkai acknowledgement, held it, lowered it. Tim said, 3 minutes and 1 second, Hadley. I looked at him. He was using the course time. He was not talking about the course. Working on 3 flat, I said. He made the quiet appreciation sound. I kept walking. They cleared me at the medical unit in 14 minutes. Nothing significant. Manageable thermal stress. 1 bruise on the right leg from the harness lever work that the attending medic noted with the expression of someone who had decided not to say the thing they were thinking. I was cleared and released. I walked back to the dormitory in the evening light of a planet that was not mine and thought, for the second time in a month, about 2 words. Can you? Not a committee. Not 11 minutes of careful deliberation. Not the diplomatic machinery of wondering aloud whether it might be appropriate to consider whether the human cadet could possibly be suitable. Just can you? And the answer had been yes. And the answer would keep being yes. I sat on the 2-wide bed. I opened my notebook. I wrote about the transition between the climbing section and the gap section, and the 4 seconds I was still losing there, and the 3 possible solutions I had been turning over for the past week, ranked by likelihood of working. Then I put the notebook away. Then I lay back and looked at the ceiling in the quiet dormitory and thought about everyone who had ever come from Earth. Every person shaped under that gravity and that weather, carrying that long, complicated, often difficult history of a species that kept surviving things it was not supposed to survive. Every person who had been looked at by someone with an incomplete model and found insufficient. I thought about what Velthara had said on the first day. Structural limitations, performance gaps, biological constraints. I thought about what he had said when it mattered. Can you? 2 words was an entire shift. 2 words instead of every other version of that question that would have taken longer and meant less. I was not a curiosity. I was not an error in the admissions process. I was not someone else's demonstration of biological limitation or their case study in the difficulty of cross-species training. I was Claire Hadley, from a small town in northern England where the wind came off the hills loaded with rain and cold, and the specific kind of challenge that a difficult place makes against the things trying to live in it. From a planet that had never made anything easy. From a species that had turned that difficulty into everything it was. The ceiling was plain and pale above me. The clicking snore had started in the far corner, steady and rhythmic and familiar as a clock. I was a little tired. I was a little proud. Mostly I was thinking about the obstacle course transition section and which of the 3 solutions to try first in the morning. Probably the second one, the angle approach, Sovi's method adapted for a different section. I would test it before anyone else arrived. And then Bron would show up, because he always did now. And we would run the course and he would push his personal best and I would push mine and neither of us would make a significant event of it because that was not how either of us worked. We would just run. We would just do the next thing and the thing after that. And slowly, in the way that slow things are sometimes the most permanent, the gap between what this academy thought a human could do and what a human actually could do would close. Not all at once. Not with a single dramatic proof. with consistent early mornings and filled notebooks and the specific kind of patience that comes from knowing your ground even when no one else does yet. Velthara would teach the new sections of the obstacle course to the next intake and call them standard. Delegate Oren would file her report, and the curriculum review would happen, and some small, important thing would change in how the Academy understood the species it accepted. And somewhere on Earth, in a barn or a gymnasium or a field or a second-hand training room, someone who had not yet passed their entrance test would be running assessments alone in the cold and not knowing that the path was already a little clearer than it had been. 5 in the morning was going to come exactly when I expected it. I was already looking forward to it. We had not come this far by being fragile. We had come this far by surviving everything that tried to make us that way. And there was always something next to survive. Always something to find a solution for. Always another morning.